How are you? Trump's pulling ahead of Biden in the polls. If the election was held today, nightmare scenario for the world, Trump would probably win it. How did this come to be? Well, the reason, and it's a very simple reason, is that people trust Trump on the economy more. Now, we're going to discuss politics, but we're not going to discuss it politically, okay? We're going to discuss it in terms of empirical facts and economics, so you understand what's really going on here. So, people trust Trump on the economy more. Nobody should trust Trump on anything, right? I mean, that's not a political point. He doesn't exactly have a great track record as the most credible person in the world. And it's even more perplexing that people would trust Trump on the economy more, of all people, right? This is a guy who's now being brought up on, basically fraud charges many times over. So he's not exactly the world's greatest businessman either. It's far from being kind of a Nobel laureate in economics or, a famous intellectual or whatever. So why do people trust Trump on the economy more than the Democrats? That's the central question in this election, okay? We're going to talk about it in a couple of ways. We're going to talk about what's happening with the economy. We're going to talk about how economics influence politics. And then we're going to talk about how, political parties get all this wrong, okay? So let's think about the economy for a second. We've been discussing recently a range of really disturbing statistics that have come out recently. So, just the other day, we were talking about how 70% of people find the economy a significant source of stress in their lives, right? So we could say that economic stress is endemic in America. And there's another statistic we discussed recently. 70% of people feel financially traumatized. Both cases, 70%. Okay, so clearly the economy is not doing well in people's eyes. Okay, and those numbers have grown over time. So in 2019, the number of people who were stressed out about the economy for whom it was a major, significant source of stress in their lives was 40%. Today, it's 70%. What's kind of happening is that people, and they'll tell pollsters openly, they trust Trump on the economy more, and they think that when Trump was in power, the economy was quote unquote doing better, okay? So that's kind of the context. Now let's talk about the actual state of the economy, not just America's, but the world's. So what's happening in the global economy? Well, we are now in a very different economic age. We're in an age of stagflation. And it sucks. It hurts. It's painful. Prices have skyrocketed. And even though, not very good economists will tell you prices have kind of stabilized a little bit, better economists will tell you that they remain very high compared to their historical averages. Okay, so that's inflation. Then there's stagnation. We have no long-run sources of growth on the horizon, and that's different from the last 50, even 100 years. So stagnation and inflation, two of the worst things that can happen to economies, all happening together. Okay, normally when they happen, they're a result of war, or conquest, or natural calamity, or what have you. So they're happening together, and they're long-run trends. And this started happening, I guess through around 2000, maybe 2010, depending on where you live in the world. So stagflation has crept in over the last few decades. So the economy sucks. It's in terrible shape. That's not really Joe Biden's fault. We're going to come back to, how it got there and whose fault it is. But it's foolish to just blame it on Biden, because these are problems that affect the whole world, and they're historical, and they go back a long time now, okay? So it can hardly be the fault of one guy. Now, what the Democrats have done is made a terrible, terrible mistake, okay? It makes me hold my head in agony. It's so stupid. They are turning around to people and saying, hey, the economy is doing fantastically well. And you'll hear them say it over and over again. And they have this legion of guys on their side, right? So like columnists and pundits and whatever. And these guys are out there trumpeting the party line, which is the economy is doing fantastically well. So nobody believes it, right? When you have an economy where 70% of people are saying, hey, I'm quote unquote financially traumatized, or 70% of people are saying, hey, the economy is a significant source of stress in my life, money, inflation, making ends meet, paying the bills. Obviously, the economy cannot be doing well, right? Because this is obviously the economy cannot be doing well. Because this is normal life stuff. We shouldn't be stressed. And we should never see 70% of people distressed about an economy. It's just normal life, right? So that tells us something is going badly wrong. But the Democrats have played a very ham-fisted game when it comes to this. They keep telling people the economy is doing great. And so what's happened is, very predictably, the Democrats lack credibility on this issue. And unfortunately, it's the number one issue in the country, the economy, right? When we ask voters to tell you over and over again, number one issue, the economy. And so it's not so much that people trust Trump more. I think, there's a general understanding that Trump is not the world's most trustworthy guy, apart from maybe the hardcore, fringe of Trumpists. But it is the case that people don't trust the Democrats. So through this combination of kind of ham-fisted messaging about the economy, they've left an opening, right? They're not credible, so that makes the other contender, the opponent, more credible. So that's kind of the big picture, okay? And I want to tell you, I don't talk with you guys about this very often, but I'm one of the guys that reinvented modern market, okay? And my theory was very simple. You got to stop bullshitting people. You can't keep going with the old level of bullshit. It's not the Mad Men world anymore. Okay, and I call this thing meaningful brands, blah, 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 blah. So we talk about that another time. But the point is, the Democrats are playing that game. Old school marketing. If we just repeat the slogan enough times, maybe people will believe it. It doesn't work in this world anymore. You cannot keep telling people that something like the economy is doing well when it isn't, when they're living that experience and they know that it isn't. Okay, you can get away with big lies in another domain, which is like pointing the finger at scapegoats for it, which is what, a lot of this new authoritarian fascist politics is based on. But you can't lie to people about the most basic experiences of their lives. So the Democrats have played this ham-fisted game. They're not seen as credible on the biggest issue. That's why Trump is pulling ahead. So let's go back to the big picture now that you kind of have a solid grasp on that, okay? The economy is going to be like this. This is the new normal, guys, okay? Unfortunately for all of us, this is the age we're in. So stagnation and inflation are set to continue well into the horizon of forever now, right? So when you think about an example like insurers pulling out of states like California and Florida, that's an extreme form of inflation, so extreme that you can't get the product or service anymore. Why is that happening? Climate change. Okay, so climate change is going to be the biggest driver of inflation and stagnation going forward. The prices are so immense that the most powerful and richest organizations on earth, like insurance companies, are just saying, hey, we can't pay them, and they're walking away. So that's one indication of how dire the economic situation is that we're in. It's a serious thing. Now, in the midst of all that chaos and bewilderment and these long-run negative economic trends, should people trust Trump on the economy more? And the answer to that is obviously not, right? I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to tell you this. I say this wearing my economist hat. Officially, no. Of course you shouldn't trust Trump on the economy more. Why would you, right? I mean, he's a guy who doesn't have a plan for any of the biggest problems in the country, in the world. And those are big problems, right? So we have climate change, we have climbing debt levels all over the world, we have personal financial crises mounting, we have long-term problems of kind of like, not really unemployment, but very low-quality employment. We have young people who are absolutely in despair and crisis. I'll throw up a chart for you here. So those problems need real leadership and real vision and real solutions, okay? And whether or not, somebody like Biden is going to provide them or not is not the question. The question is, should you trust Trump on the economy more? Absolutely not, right? That's a ham-fisted thing to do yourself. So why are people going in that direction? Well, one reason we discussed is that the Democrats have created their own lack of credibility on this biggest issue. The other reason, I think, is that people are so scared and so traumatized and so distressed, and you can see it in those numbers, right? 70% of people feel financially traumatized, that they're not thinking straight. So in that context, Trump is pulling ahead of Biden. And so the Democrats now have some time, a little bit of time, to correct this mistake, but they're very difficult people, the Democrats. I reach out to them every couple of years and I say, guys, you're going to make this mistake. And lo and behold, they make the mistake. And then they don't know what to do. So until people begin to trust anybody but Trump on the economy more, he's going to be surging ahead, because that's the most important issue. And it's the most important issue in America for a very simple reason. America is a hyper-capitalist society. The economy is life or death. It's, perish or survive. It's Darwinian, right? So the economy is always the number one issue for Americans. And to blow your credibility on that issue is such an amateur level mistake that it beggars belief for me, really. So there's a deep kind of truth there that needs to be acknowledged, right? Which is that the economy was better before. But that's not Trump's doing. And the economy being terrible today is not Biden's doing, right? We call this in economics, what's happening in the economy today, the global cost of living crisis, right? Everybody around the world is being hit by this. People are struggling immensely these days, wherever you are in the world. So much so that last summer, India stopped exporting rice. A big measure of how desperate things are out there. So global cost of living crisis, global age of stagflation. These are big picture issues. The economy is now in kind of terminal decline, okay? The industrial age economy. And we see some hints of post-capitalism, post-industrialization beginning to emerge. They're not happening fast enough or widely enough to recreate a broadly shared prosperity for people. And that's why the economy is going downhill, okay? And this is going to be a long-term trend. It didn't start with Biden taking office. It started way before, started probably around 2000. But what happened was, and this is a very disastrous set of things, around 2019, 2020, we saw all of our civilization's major indicators go into decline. And we'll discuss this in future videos, but human development, human progress, real global economic growth, all of these things started to go into decline. And they're going to keep, stagnating or declining because, like I said, the issues before us are immense, right? What this leaves everyday politicians in is a kind of trap, right? Those who are in power have to take blame for this decline in global economy and society and, the kind of fraying of civilization, even if it's not their fault. So Biden, a little unfairly, is being blamed for all of this. And even more unfairly, Trump is getting credit for something he doesn't deserve, right? Just because the economy was better, because we hadn't crossed, these major turning points, and global ones in 2019, 2020, whatever, doesn't mean that Trump is, some kind of economic or financial genius, right? Like, clearly he's not. And I think we all know that. But it's a measure of how badly the Democrats have bungled it that people trust a guy like Trump more than they trust them. But it's not that people, I think, were like, hey, man, Trump is the most trustworthy guy in the world. No, we all know he's not, except the diehard fringe, right? But they don't trust the Democrats, right? So it's a matter of kind of a lack of credibility that's gone on here. Elementary mistake. And it leaves the Democrats in a very, very difficult position now. They shouldn't have made this mistake. They shouldn't have been out there for the last couple of years trumpeting this foolish line that the economy is doing great. So when the Democrats go out there, they shouldn't have been ignoring these statistics, right? They should have been saying things like, hey man, if 70% of people are financially traumatized, I know things are bad out there and we're going to help you. This is how we're going to fix things. You have to start by acknowledging that problem. Otherwise, you don't have credibility, right? It's basic principle. Marketing, life, communications, leadership. So the Democrats have kind of failed that first test with people. That's why they're not connecting with people on the biggest issue there is. And so that predicts that Trump will continue to surge ahead. Now, one way the Democrats are trying to address this is to attack Trump and say, hey, man, you're not such a great figure when it comes to economic or financial issues. And, that can work a little bit. But the problem is not that. Really. The problem is that Democrats don't have credibility themselves, and they need to address it that way, guys. They really need to understand that it's not just about, it's not that people think Trump is some kind of financial genius, apart from, like I said, the fringe. It's that the Democrats themselves don't have credibility. They're not trusted on this issue because they begin by failing to acknowledge how tough and grim it is out there, how much of a crisis this really is. I mean, think about it. If me and the head of the IMF and the World Bank and the UN and everybody in the world is a good economist and a top thinker is saying, hey, there's a global cost of living crisis and, our civilization's on the brink. And meanwhile, the Democrats are the only ones out there who are saying things like things are great and the economy's booming. There's something's wrong with this picture, right? So that needs to change. And until that changes, Trump is going to keep pulling ahead. The Democrats need to build credibility on this issue. And you might ask, can they do it? That's an open question. That's a really open question. That part is up to them. What I can say is that unless they build credibility on the biggest issue, which is the economy, they're going to lose the election. Okay, and Trump will win, and it will be a catastrophe for all of us. So please, Democrats, wake up. I hope the Democrats, fix their game. I hope they get into the 21st century with the rest of us, when it comes to building credibility and trust and talking to people about issues in realistic ways, because right now they're not doing that when it comes to the biggest issue. So that's the situation. Now, what is the risk of, Trump becoming president? Again, it's very real. Okay, and again, this is not a political point. We'll discuss this in future videos, but this would be catastrophic for the world, right? It would trigger a huge financial crisis the very first day, probably, and we'll get into that later. But the risk is very real, and it's climbing because of all the things we've talked about, right? And what we don't want to happen, if we're sensible and thoughtful people, is to have a very clueless president in a stagflationary economy, right? That would be just absolutely catastrophic because, like we discussed, these problems affect the whole world. They're not necessarily Biden's fault. And to have somebody that thinks the answer is whatever Trump's, mania of the day is, would be catastrophic. The problems would only get worse and worse, right? It's kind of par for the course. So that's a lot to take in. I hope that helped a little bit. We'll talk more about it soon. Thank you for listening. You know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll be back with you soon. Thank you. Bye.